The gunshot echoed across the Nebraska City fairgrounds, causing Amelia Dawson to flinch and clutch her basket of freshly baked scones closer to her chest. The year was 1877, and the Nebraska Territorial Fair was in full swing, despite the tension that had been brewing in the region since the end of the Civil War 12 years prior. Amelia's auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, her blue calico dress swishing around her ankles as she navigated through the crowd of excited fairgoers. "Just the shooting gallery," a passing gentleman assured the startled onlookers with a tip of his hat. Amelia exhaled in relief. At 22, she had witnessed enough real gunfire during the tumultuous years following the war to last a lifetime. She continued her journey through the fairgrounds, stopping occasionally to admire the agricultural displays and handcrafted goods from across the Nebraska Territory. Finest apples east of the Platte River, boasted a ruddy-faced farmer as Amelia paused before his stand. "They look wonderful, Mr. Peterson," she replied with a polite smile, selecting 2 shiny red apples and placing them in her basket. The late September sun beat down relentlessly, and Amelia found herself seeking refuge beneath the shade of a large oak tree. The fair bustled around her, children shrieked with delight as they chased each other. Women gathered in circles to discuss the latest fashions from back east, and men argued politics and cattle prices with equal fervor. Amelia had come to the fair to sell her baked goods, and perhaps enjoy a brief respite from her daily responsibilities at the boarding house she ran with her aging aunt. Since her parents' passing 3 years ago, she had shouldered the burden of keeping the establishment afloat, a task that left little time for socializing or courtship. "Well now, what do we have here?" The voice, rough and unfamiliar, came from behind her. Amelia turned to find herself facing a man whose appearance immediately set her on edge. His clothes were travel-worn, his face unshaven, and his eyes cold and calculating roved over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Just some scones and sweetbread," she replied cautiously, taking a step back. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Wasn't talking about what's in your basket, sweetheart." He moved closer, blocking her retreat. "Name's Jasper Blackwell. I ride with the Dixon gang." Amelia's blood ran cold. The Dixon gang had been terrorizing towns across the territory for months, robbing banks, raiding stage coaches, and leaving a trail of violence in their wake. "Excuse me, sir, but I really must be going." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Now don't be like that." Jasper reached out, his dirty fingers wrapping around her wrist with bruising force. "Me and the boys are camped just outside town. Thought you might join us for some entertainment." "I most certainly will not," Amelia replied, attempting to pull away. His grip tightened. "Wasn't asking, darlin'." "Let go of me this instant." She tried to twist free, panic rising in her chest as his other hand clamped around her waist. "You're coming with me whether you like it or not," he growled, beginning to drag her away from the crowd. Amelia opened her mouth to scream, but Jasper quickly covered it with his calloused hand. "Make a sound, and I'll make sure your precious little town pays for it." The basket fell from her grasp, scones tumbling onto the dirt as she struggled against his grip. No one seemed to notice her plight as the bandit pulled her toward the edge of the fairgrounds where several horses were tethered. "She's spoken for." The voice was deep and steady, cutting through Amelia's fear like a knife. Jasper paused, his grip loosening just enough for Amelia to wrench her face free. "And who might you be?" Jasper sneered, turning to face the newcomer. Amelia followed his gaze and found herself looking at a tall figure standing a few yards away. The sun silhouetted him from behind, casting his face in shadow, but she could make out the broad shoulders, the Stetson hat, and the unmistakable outline of a gun holstered at his hip. "Name's Colton Grey," came the reply as the man stepped forward into the light. "And I believe the lady would prefer to stay here." Colton Grey was not a man easily forgotten once seen. His face was tanned from years under the open sky, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's stubble. His eyes, a startling shade of green, were fixed on Jasper with unwavering intensity. He wore a faded blue shirt, dust covered from the trail, and worn leather chaps over his denim trousers. The badge pinned to his vest caught the sunlight Deputy Marshal of the Nebraska Territory. "Well, Deputy," Jasper said with a mocking laugh, "this ain't your concern. The lady and I were just getting acquainted." His grip tightened on Amelia's arm, causing her to wince. "No." Amelia's voice was firm despite her fear. "I said no." She twisted sharply, driving her heel into Jasper's in step with all her might. The bandit howled in pain, releasing her momentarily, just long enough for her to stumble away from his grasp. Jasper lunged for her again, fury contorting his features, but Colton moved with surprising speed. In an instant, he was between them, his revolver drawn and leveled at Jasper's chest. "I wouldn't," Colton advised, his voice deceptively calm. "Not unless you're eager to meet your maker today." A tense silence fell over the scene, drawing the attention of nearby fairgoers. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd as recognition dawned. "That's Jasper Blackwell." "From the Dixon gang. What's he doing here?" Jasper's eyes darted around, assessing his situation. His hand hovered near his own pistol, but he seemed to think better of it as Colton's unwavering aim remained fixed on him. "This ain't over," Jasper spat, backing away slowly. "Dixon don't take kindly to interference." "Then Dixon can take it up with me personally," Colton replied evenly. "Now get on your horse and ride out. Don't let me see your face in Nebraska City again." For a moment, it seemed as though Jasper might challenge the deputy, but a quick glance at the growing crowd and the several men who had now drawn their own weapons appeared to change his mind. "You'll regret this," he promised, directing his venomous glare at both Colton and Amelia before stalking away toward the horses. Only when Jasper had mounted and ridden beyond the fairground perimeter did Colton holster his weapon and turn to Amelia. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his expression. Amelia nodded, though her hands trembled as she smoothed down her skirts. "Yes, thanks to you, Deputy Grey. I'm Amelia Dawson. Pleased to meet you, Miss Dawson, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He knelt down to gather the scattered contents of her fallen basket. Shame about these. They looked like they were mighty fine scones. Despite the gravity of what had just occurred, Amelia found herself smiling at his attempt to lighten the mood. "I've plenty more at the boarding house." In fact, she hesitated briefly before continuing. "Perhaps you'd like to stop by for some fresh ones, as a thank you." Colton handed her the now filled basket, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Dawson. I might just take you up on that offer." "Amelia." The shrill voice of her aunt, Martha Dawson, cut through their conversation as the older woman hurried toward them, her face pinched with worry. "Good heavens, child. Mrs. Henderson just told me what happened. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Aunt Martha," Amelia assured her, casting a grateful glance at Colton. Deputy Grey intervened before any harm was done. Martha clutched her chest dramatically. "A member of the Dixon gang right here at our fair. What is the world coming to?" She turned to Colton with an appraising look. "Well, Deputy, it seems we owe you our gratitude." "Just doing my job, madam," Colton replied with a respectful tip of his hat. "Though I'm concerned about Blackwell showing up here, means the gang might be planning something in the area." Martha's eyes widened with fresh alarm. You don't think they'd raid Nebraska City, do you? We're a peaceful town. That's precisely what makes you a target, Colton explained grimly. I've been tracking their movements for weeks. They've been hitting smaller towns with minimal law enforcement, and your sheriff's been laid up with that broken leg. All the more reason for you to come for supper, Amelia interjected. You can tell us what precautions we should take. Martha nodded vigorously. Indeed. You must join us this evening, Deputy Grey. The boarding house is just off Main Street, the blue two-story with the white trim. I know it, Colton said with a smile that transformed his weathered face, making him appear younger and more approachable. Best reputation in town. A flush of pride colored Amelia's cheeks at the compliment. 7 o'clock then. I'll be there, Colton promised. His gaze lingered on Amelia for a moment longer than necessary before he turned his attention back to the fairgrounds. For now, though, I'd better make sure Blackwell has truly departed and isn't lurking about with friends. As Colton strode away, Martha linked her arm through Amelia's and began guiding her back toward the center of the fair. My goodness, what an ordeal! But I must say that Deputy Grey is quite handsome, isn't he? And so gallant, Aunt Martha. Amelia chided, though she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. He was simply doing his duty. Perhaps, Martha replied with a knowing look. But I didn't miss the way he looked at you, my dear, nor the way you looked at him. Amelia said nothing, but her thoughts remained on the deputy as they continued through the fair. There had been something in his green eyes, something beyond mere duty or obligation that had stirred something within her, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. At the edge of town, Jasper Blackwell rode hard until he reached a secluded grove where 4 men waited, their horses tethered to low-hanging branches and a small campfire crackling between them. Took you long enough, growled a heavy-set man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jawline. This was Rufus Dixon himself, leader of the notorious gang that had been the scourge of the Nebraska territory for the past year. Jasper dismounted, spitting into the dirt before answering. Had a run-in with the law in town. Deputy Marshal by the name of Grey. Dixon's eyes narrowed. Grey, Colton Grey. When Jasper nodded, Dixon cursed violently. That complicates things. He's been dogging us since Fort Kearney. He interfered with my entertainment, Jasper complained, dropping onto a fallen log. Had my sights set on a pretty little thing selling baked goods. You fool, Dixon snarled. We're here to rob the bank during the fair when everyone's distracted, not to satisfy your base urges. Now Grey knows we're in the area. The youngest member of the gang, a freckle-faced outlaw barely out of his teens who went by the name of Shorty, looked up nervously. Maybe we should move on, boss. Hit another town. Dixon considered this for a moment before shaking his head. No. The bank in Nebraska City is flush with cash from the harvest sales. We just need to adjust our plan. He fixed Jasper with a hard stare. And maybe use your little encounter to our advantage. How's that? Jasper asked, intrigued despite his lingering anger. A slow, cruel smile spread across Dixon's scarred face. You said Grey took a special interest in protecting your would-be entertainment. Perhaps she's the key to eliminating our deputy problem once and for all. Back at the Dawson boarding house, Amelia busied herself preparing for the evening's special guest. The regular boarders, Mr. Finch, the elderly schoolteacher, the widow Holloway, and the Simmons brothers who worked at the lumberyard were already seated at the long dining table when Martha bustled in with news of their additional dinner companion. A deputy marshal, you say? Mr. Finch adjusted his spectacles with interest. Perhaps he might share some tales of his adventures apprehending outlaws. The younger Simmons brother, Thomas, leaned forward eagerly. I heard he tracked the Wilson brothers all the way to Colorado last year, brought him back single-handed. Now, gentlemen, Martha cautioned, let's not pester the poor man with too many questions. He's coming as our guest, not to provide entertainment. Amelia emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming tureen of beef stew, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the stove. She had changed from her fair dress into a simple but becoming blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, which she had let down from its earlier severe style to fall in soft waves around her shoulders. "My word, Amelia," Widow Holloway remarked with a raised eyebrow, "you've certainly made an effort this evening." Before Amelia could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Martha hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Colton Grey in tow. He had clearly made an effort as well. His clothes were clean, his hair damp from a recent washing, and he had shaved the stubble from his jaw, revealing a small scar along his chin that somehow added to rather than detracted from his handsome features. "Deputy Grey," Martha announced with undisguised satisfaction, "welcome to our home." Colton removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Dawson." His gaze found Amelia and a smile softened his features. "Miss Dawson." Amelia nodded in greeting, suddenly finding herself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. "Please sit here," Martha directed, indicating a vacant chair beside Amelia's place at the table. "We're just about to begin." As they settled into the meal, conversation flowed easily. Colton proved to be both articulate and engaging, sharing tales of his work as a deputy marshal that fascinated the other boarders without glorifying the violence that often accompanied law enforcement on the frontier. "So, what brings you to Nebraska City, Deputy Grey?" Mr. Finch inquired as they enjoyed Amelia's apple cobbler for dessert. "Surely not just our little fair." "No, sir," Colton admitted, setting down his spoon. "I've been tracking the Dixon gang for several months now. They've been moving eastward across the territory, and I had intelligence suggesting they might target Nebraska City during the fair." A hush fell over the table at this revelation. "You don't mean to say that ruffian who accosted Amelia was actually part of the gang?" Martha asked, her hand fluttering to her throat. Colton nodded grimly. "Jasper Blackwell. He's Dixon's right-hand man and every bit as dangerous as his boss." "But surely he wouldn't dare return after you confronted him," Amelia said, her voice betraying a hint of the fear she'd been suppressing since the encounter. "I'm afraid men like Blackwell don't scare easily," Colton replied, his expression softening as he noticed her distress. "But neither do they act alone. If Dixon is planning something in Nebraska City, he'll need his whole gang. That gives me a chance to catch them all at once." "Isn't that rather dangerous?" Amelia asked, concern evident in her voice. Colton shrugged. "It's my job, Miss Dawson." "Well," Martha declared, rising from her seat, "I think we've had quite enough talk of outlaws and danger for one evening. Mr. Finch, perhaps you might favor us with a tune on the piano in the parlor." As the gathering moved to the parlor, Colton lightly touched Amelia's elbow, holding her back. "Might I have a word with you in private, Miss Dawson?" Intrigued. Amelia nodded and led him to the small study adjacent to the parlor where she handled the boarding house accounts. "I wanted to apologize," Colton began once the door was partially closed, allowing them privacy while still adhering to propriety. "Whatever for?" Amelia asked, genuinely puzzled. "For alarming you and your aunt with talk of the Dixon gang." He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture for such a composed man. "The truth is, I'm concerned about your safety. Blackwell isn't the type to forget a slight, and the fact that he saw me defend you might make you a target." Amelia's breath caught. "You think he might return?" I think it's a possibility we can't ignore, Colton admitted, which is why I'd like your permission to arrange some additional protection for the boarding house until the gang is apprehended. Of course, Amelia agreed readily, though I hope it won't be necessary for long. Colton's expression grew serious. I hope so too, but there's something else you should know. He hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. When I intervened today, I may have given Blackwell the impression that you and I are acquainted. Acquainted, Amelia repeated, raising an eyebrow. I said you were spoken for, Colton clarified, a slight flush rising on his tanned cheeks. It seemed the quickest way to make him back down. I hope you don't mind. A small smile played at Amelia's lips. Well, Deputy Grey, I suppose I should be grateful you didn't claim we were married. Colton chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing somewhat. That would have been presumptuous indeed, Miss Dawson. His expression grew serious once more. But in all sincerity, I want you to know that I'm committed to ensuring your safety. The Dixon gang will be brought to justice, and they won't harm you or anyone in Nebraska City if I have anything to say about it. The earnestness in his voice stirred something within Amelia, a sense of security she hadn't felt since her father's passing. I believe you, Deputy. Colton, he corrected gently. If we're to pretend some level of familiarity to keep Blackwell at bay, you might as well use my given name. Colton, Amelia repeated, testing the name on her tongue. And you must call me Amelia. He smiled, and Amelia couldn't help noticing how it transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. Amelia it is. From the parlor came the sound of Mr. Finch beginning a lively rendition of Buffalo Gals, followed by Martha's encouraging applause. We should join the others, Amelia suggested, though she found herself reluctant to end their private conversation. Colton nodded, offering his arm with unexpected gallantry. Shall we? As Amelia placed her hand on his arm, she was struck by the solid strength beneath her fingertips and the strange fluttering sensation it provoked in her stomach. This was no mere attraction to a handsome face, she realized with startling clarity. There was something about Colton Grey, his quiet confidence, his evident integrity, his gentle manner despite his dangerous profession that spoke to her on a deeper level. And as they rejoined the gathering, Amelia found herself wondering if perhaps his claim that she was spoken for might someday hold more truth than either of them had initially intended. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, the fair's second day promising to be even busier than the first. Amelia rose early, her mind still lingering on the previous evening's conversation with Colton. He had stayed late, entertaining the boarders with stories of his travels across the territory, and even joining in when Mr. Finch convinced the group to sing a few hymns around the piano. But it was the moment of his departure that Amelia found herself replaying in her mind as she dressed. He had taken her hand in his touch gentle, despite the calluses that spoke of his hard life on the trail. I'll check in on you tomorrow, he had promised, his green eyes serious in the lamplight of the foyer. In the meantime, keep your doors locked and stay alert, especially at the fair. I'm not easily frightened, Deputy Colton, she had replied with more bravado than she felt. His lips had quirked in that half-smile that was becoming increasingly familiar. I don't doubt your courage for a moment, Amelia, but caution isn't the same as fear. Now, as she descended the stairs to begin breakfast preparations, Amelia found herself looking forward to his promised visit with an eagerness that both surprised and slightly alarmed her. It wouldn't do to develop feelings for a man whose very profession kept him constantly on the move, chasing outlaws across the vast expanse of the frontier. The back door opened, startling her from her reverie as Martha entered with a basket of eggs from their small henhouse. "You're up and about early," her aunt observed, setting the basket on the kitchen table. "I hope you're not planning to return to the fair today. After yesterday's incident, I need to, Aunt Martha," Amelia interrupted gently. "We've paid for our stall for the full 3 days, and the extra income from the baked goods makes a significant difference to our accounts." Martha's lips thinned with disapproval. "Surely our safety is worth more than a few dollars from scones and sweetbread." "Deputy Colton said he would check on me," Amelia assured her. "And I'll be careful, I promise." "Colton, is it?" Martha's eyebrows rose knowingly. "You two seemed to get along rather well last night." Amelia busied herself with the stove to hide the flush rising to her cheeks. "He's simply concerned about our safety, given Blackwell's threats." "Hum," Martha hummed skeptically. "And I suppose the way he hardly took his eyes off you all evening was purely professional concern as well." Before Amelia could formulate a response, a sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Martha hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Sheriff Tate hobbling behind her on crutches, his broken leg still encased in a bulky splint. "Morning, Miss Dawson," the sheriff greeted, lowering himself carefully into a kitchen chair at Martha's insistence. "Hope I'm not disturbing your breakfast preparations." "Not at all, Sheriff," Amelia assured him. "What brings you out so early, especially in your condition?" Sheriff Tate's weathered face grew serious. "Deputy Marshal Grey stopped by my office at dawn. He's arranged for 2 of my deputies to keep an eye on the boarding house and asked me to personally warn you against going to the fair today." Amelia's heart sank. Did something happen? One of the stage coach drivers reported seeing riders matching the Dixon gang's description camped about 5 miles outside of town, the sheriff explained grimly. "Gray's gone to investigate, but he was adamant that you remain here where it's safer." "But our stall can be managed by someone else," Martha interjected firmly. "Perhaps Thomas Simmons could help. He's been sweet on you for months. I'm sure he'd be happy to sell your baked goods for the day." Amelia sighed, recognizing defeat. "Very well. If you think it's truly necessary, Sheriff." "I do, Miss Dawson." Sheriff Tate's expression softened slightly. "Gray seems to think Blackwell might have taken a personal interest in you after yesterday's confrontation. Better safe than sorry." After the sheriff departed, Amelia went through the motions of preparing breakfast for the boarders, her mind turning over this new information. The idea that she might be specifically targeted by an outlaw like Jasper Blackwell was terrifying. But even more disturbing was the knowledge that Colton had ridden out to investigate the gang's camp alone. "He's experienced, dear," Martha reassured her, correctly interpreting her niece's worried expression. "Deputy Grey knows what he's doing." "I hope you're right," Amelia murmured, gazing out the kitchen window toward the eastern horizon where the sun was just beginning to clear the distant trees. Little did she know that at that very moment, Colton Grey was crouched behind a boulder, observing the Dixon gang's camp through his field glass. 5 men sat around a dying campfire, their voices carrying clearly in the still morning air. "I say we hit the bank today," Jasper Blackwell was arguing, gesturing emphatically, "while everyone's at the fair." "And I say you've lost your edge," Rufus Dixon countered, cleaning his revolver with methodical precision. "That marshal's in town now. We need to draw him out first." "Using the girl?" a third outlaw asked. Dixon nodded. "Jasper says Grey seemed mighty protective of her. If he's sweet on her, he'll come running if she's in danger." Colton's grip tightened on his field glass as cold fury washed over him. They were planning to use Amelia as bait. "So what's the plan, boss?" Shorty inquired eagerly. Dixon reassembled his revolver with practiced ease. "Simple. Jasper and Lou will go into town and grab the girl when she shows up at the fair. Bring her back here. Once we have her, we send Grey a message, come alone or the girl dies. When he shows up, we kill him, then ride into town and hit the bank before anyone even knows what happened. And the girl? Jasper asked with a leer that made Colton's blood boil. Dixon shrugged carelessly. Have your fun, then get rid of her. No witnesses. It took every ounce of Colton's self-control not to draw his weapon and confront the gang then and there. But alone against 5 experienced outlaws, his chances weren't good, and if he failed, Amelia would have no warning of the danger heading her way. Carefully backing away from his observation point, Colton returned to where he had tethered his horse. He needed to get back to Nebraska City immediately. Sheriff Tate's warning might keep Amelia from the fair today, but the Dixon gang wouldn't give up easily. They'd find another way to get to her if their first plan failed, and Colton was determined that they would fail. Because somewhere between intervening at the fair and sharing dinner at the boarding house, Amelia Dawson had become more than just an innocent citizen he was duty-bound to protect. The thought of her in the Dixon gang's clutches filled him with a dread that went far beyond professional concern. He mounted his horse and set off at a gallop, pushing the animal harder than he normally would. Time was of the essence, and he couldn't shake the feeling that, despite his precautions, Amelia was still in grave danger. At the boarding house, the morning passed with excruciating slowness for Amelia. After seeing Thomas Simmons off with her baked goods and instructions for managing the fair stall, she found herself at loose ends. Martha had insisted on keeping the front and back doors locked, and the 2 deputies Sheriff Tate had assigned remained vigilant, one stationed on the front porch, the other patrolling the perimeter of the property. By noon, Amelia could no longer bear the confinement. "I'm going to work in the garden," she announced to Martha, who was mending a tablecloth in the parlor. "Deputy Wilson is right outside. I'll be perfectly safe." Martha looked up from her needlework with a frown. "I suppose some fresh air would do you good. But stay within sight of the house, Amelia." The small vegetable garden behind the boarding house had always been Amelia's sanctuary. As she knelt among the neat rows of late-season vegetables, pulling weeds and checking the ripeness of the pumpkins, she felt some of her tension begin to ease. "Miss Dawson." The voice startled her, and Amelia looked up to find Deputy Wilson standing at the garden gate, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to disturb you, madam, but there's a gentleman at the front door asking for you. Says he has an urgent message from Deputy Marshal Grey." Amelia's heart leapt. News from Colton. "Thank you, Deputy. I'll come right away." Brushing the soil from her apron, Amelia hurried around to the front of the house where a man she didn't recognize stood on the porch. He was of average height and build, with nondescript features and clothing that marked him as likely a rancher or farmhand. "Miss Dawson?" he inquired as she approached. "I'm John Miller, foreman at the Cooper Ranch. Deputy Marshal Grey asked me to deliver a message to you personally." "Is he all right?" Amelia asked, anxiety coloring her voice. "He's fine, madam," Miller assured her. "But he's tracked the Dixon gang to a camp east of town and needs your help." Amelia frowned, suspicion blooming. "My help? What could I possibly do?" Miller glanced around conspiratorially before lowering his voice. "He didn't say exactly, madam. Just that it was urgent and you should come with me right away. He's waiting at the Cooper Ranch with some papers he needs you to identify. Something about Blackwell dropping them at the fair yesterday." The explanation sounded plausible, but something in the man's manner, a certain nervousness, an inability to meet her eyes, directly set alarm bells ringing in Amelia's mind. Colton had been adamant that she stay at the boarding house. Would he really send for her so soon after issuing that warning? "I see," she said, maintaining a calm facade while her mind raced. Well, I'll need a moment to fetch my bonnet and leave a note for my aunt. Won't you come inside while I prepare?" A flicker of unease crossed Miller's face. "Actually, madam, the deputy was quite insistent about haste. Perhaps you could just come as you are. It won't take long." Deputy Wilson, who had been standing a respectful distance away, moved closer at the tension in Amelia's voice. "Is everything all right, Miss Dawson?" Before Amelia could respond, Miller made a sudden lunge for her, wrapping an arm around her waist and pressing a knife to her ribs in one fluid motion. "Don't move, deputy," he snarled, all pretense abandoned, "or I'll cut her open right here." Deputy Wilson froze, his hand hovering over his holstered gun. "Easy now," he said, trying to sound calmer than he clearly felt. "Let's not do anything rash, Lou." Miller, or whoever he really was, called out. "Now." A shot rang out from the street, and Deputy Wilson crumpled to the ground, blood blooming on his chest. Amelia screamed as a second man, presumably Lou, emerged from behind the oak tree in the front yard, rifle still smoking in his hands. "Shut her up, Jasper," Lou growled. "Someone will have heard that shot." "Jasper." Amelia realized with horror that the man holding her was none other than Jasper Blackwell, now clean-shaven and differently dressed to avoid recognition. "You heard him," Jasper hissed in her ear, pressing the knife harder against her side until she felt a sharp sting. "One more sound and I finish what I started yesterday." Forcing down her terror, Amelia nodded her understanding. Jasper began dragging her toward the street where two horses waited. In the distance, she could hear shouts of alarm as people reacted to the gunshot. "Hurry up," Lou urged, mounting his horse. "The whole town will be here soon." Jasper roughly pushed Amelia toward his horse, keeping the knife pressed against her back. "Get on," he ordered. "And remember, one wrong move and you're dead." With no choice, Amelia allowed him to boost her onto the horse. He swung up behind her, one arm wrapped tightly around her waist, the other holding the reins. As they galloped away from the boarding house, Amelia caught a glimpse of Martha running onto the porch, her face a mask of horror as she saw her niece being carried off. "Help!" Martha screamed. "They've taken Amelia, someone help!" But it was too late. Jasper and Lou pushed their horses to a full gallop, quickly leaving the town behind. Amelia clung to the saddle horn, mind racing as she tried to think of a way to escape. The knife was no longer at her side, but Jasper's arm around her waist was like an iron band, and even if she could somehow break free, the fall from a galloping horse would likely kill or seriously injure her. Her only hope, she realized with grim clarity, was Colton. Surely he would come for her once he learned what had happened, but would he be walking into a trap, and would he find her in time? As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Amelia whispered a silent prayer, both for her own safety and for the man she was startled to realize had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. Colton Grey was less than a mile from Nebraska City when he heard the distant echo of a gunshot. His instincts immediately on alert, he urged his already tired horse to greater speed, a sense of foreboding growing with each hoofbeat. As he crested the final rise before town, he saw a commotion near the boarding house. People gathered, someone being carried on a stretcher, Sheriff Tate hobbling frantically on his crutches. "No," Colton breathed, driving his spurs into his horse's flanks. By the time he reached the boarding house, a crowd had gathered. Pushing through, he found Martha Dawson sobbing on the porch, being comforted by Widow Holloway. "Mrs. Dawson," he called, dismounting in one fluid motion. "What happened? Where's Amelia?" Martha looked up, fresh tears streaming down her face at the sight of him. "Oh, Deputy Grey, they took her. Those terrible men shot poor Deputy Wilson and took my Amelia." Cold dread settled in Colton's stomach. "When? How long ago?" Not 15 minutes passed, Sheriff Tate replied, his face grim. Wilson's still alive, thank God, but barely. Doc's working on him now. It was that Blackwell creature, Martha added, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. He'd shaved his beard, but Amelia must have recognized him. I heard her scream before the shot. Colton's jaw tightened. Which way did they go? East, one of the townsmen volunteered. 2 riders moving fast. The girl was on Blackwell's horse. Without another word, Colton turned back to his horse, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. "Gray," Sheriff Tate called, "wait for reinforcements." "My other deputy's gathering a posse right now." Colton shook his head grimly. "There's no time. They're taking her to Dixon's camp about 5 miles east of here. If I wait, she's dead." "Then at least take some men with you," the sheriff insisted. "Dixon has 5 guns at least." "And they'll kill Amelia the moment they see a posse approaching," Colton countered. "Dixon wants me, Tate. He's using her as bait." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's weathered face. "It's a trap." "I know." Colton swung into the saddle, his expression resolute. "Form your posse. Follow at a distance, but give me at least an hour head start." Martha stepped forward, her tear-stained face suddenly fierce. "Bring her back, deputy. Bring my girl home safe." Colton nodded once, his green eyes hard with determination. "I will, Mrs. Dawson, that's a promise." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped east, following the faint tracks left by Jasper and Lou's hasty departure. His mind raced ahead, formulating and discarding plans. 5 against 1 were terrible odds, especially with Amelia as a hostage. But he had the advantage of knowing exactly where their camp was located and how it was laid out. And he had something else, something Dixon couldn't possibly anticipate. Absolute resolve. Because somewhere between seeing Jasper Blackwell grab Amelia at the fair and sharing quiet conversation in her study, Colton Grey had fallen in love with Amelia Dawson. It had happened so swiftly, so unexpectedly, that he'd barely acknowledged it to himself until this moment. But now, with her life in danger, the truth of his feelings hit him with stunning clarity. And he knew with bone-deep certainty that he would either bring Amelia safely back to Nebraska City or die trying. The Dixon gang's camp was situated in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwood trees, with a creek running nearby. It offered good visibility in all directions, making a surprise approach difficult, exactly why Dixon had chosen it. As Colton neared the location, he dismounted and tethered his horse in a dense thicket, proceeding the rest of the way on foot with the caution of a man who had spent years tracking dangerous prey. From his concealed position at the edge of the trees, he surveyed the camp. Rufus Dixon sat on a fallen log, cleaning his revolver, a habit Colton had noticed earlier. Shorty was tending the fire, while the 5th gang member, a hulking brute known as Big Mike, was checking the horses. Of Jasper, Lou, and Amelia, there was no sign yet. Colton settled in to wait, calculating distances and angles, marking potential cover. When Jasper and Lou arrived with Amelia, he needed to be ready. He didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, he heard the approach of horses from the west. Dixon and the others heard it too, rising to their feet with hands near their weapons, until Jasper's voice called out a greeting. Colton's heart pounded as Jasper and Lou rode into the clearing. Jasper had Amelia seated before him on his horse, one arm wrapped possessively around her waist. Even from a distance, Colton could see that her dress was torn at the shoulder and a smear of dirt marred her cheek, but she sat straight-backed and defiant. "Look what we brought, Dixon," Jasper announced, roughly pulling Amelia from the horse. She stumbled as her feet hit the ground, but quickly regained her balance. Her chin lifted in a display of courage that made Colton's chest tighten with pride and fear. Dixon approached, circling Amelia like a predator assessing its prey. "So this is the girl that has Deputy Grey so concerned." "Pretty enough, I suppose. Grey ain't seen her yet," Lou reported, dismounting. "We got her clean away before he returned to town." "He'll come," Dixon said with confidence, "and when he does, we'll be ready." He turned to Amelia, gripping her chin in his hand and forcing her to look at him. "Isn't that right, my dear? Your gallant deputy will come charging to the rescue." Amelia jerked her face away from his grasp. "If he's smart, he'll bring the entire U.S. cavalry with him," she retorted, her voice steadier than Colton would have expected under the circumstances. Dixon laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Spirited. I can see why Grey took a shine to you." His expression hardened. "But for your sake, you'd better hope he comes alone, because if he brings reinforcements, you'll be the first to die. Tie her up," he ordered Shorty. "Over by that tree where she can be seen from the trail." As Shorty bound Amelia's hands in front of her and secured her to a cottonwood tree at the edge of the clearing, Colton assessed his options. He had hoped to wait for nightfall when darkness would give him an advantage, but Dixon's implied threat to Amelia's safety, if he delayed too long, changed the calculus. He needed a diversion, something to draw at least some of the gang members away from the camp, evening the odds a bit. An idea formed, dangerous but potentially effective. Carefully, silently, he worked his way back to where he had left his horse. Meanwhile, in the camp, Amelia tested the ropes binding her wrists, finding them painfully tight. Shorty had tied her to the tree in such a way that she was forced to stand, her back against the rough bark, facing the clearing where the gang members were now sharing a bottle of whiskey. "What about the bank job?" Lou was asking Dixon. "We just giving up on that?" Dixon took a swig from the bottle before answering. "Patience. Once Grey is dead, we'll have plenty of time. The fair doesn't end until tomorrow night. And her?" Jasper nodded toward Amelia, his expression making his intentions clear. "Like I said before," Dixon replied with a shrug, "have your fun when this is over. Just make sure she doesn't live to identify any of us." Amelia felt sick at the casual way they discussed her fate, but refused to show fear. If these were to be her final hours, she would face them with the same dignity her parents had taught her to carry through life. Her thoughts turned to Colton. She had known him for barely a day, yet the connection between them had been immediate and powerful. Was it possible to fall in love so quickly? She had always scoffed at the notion of love at first sight, considering it a fanciful myth perpetuated by dime novels and the romantically inclined. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart had leapt at the sight of him, nor the sense of absolute trust she felt in his presence. If this was love, it was both the most wonderful and most cruel twist of fate to find him only to lose him, and possibly her life, so soon after. A sudden commotion from the eastern edge of the camp interrupted her thoughts. Smoke was rising from the trees, quickly thickening into a dark column. "Fire!" Shorty cried, pointing unnecessarily. Dixon cursed, rising to his feet. "Big Mike, Lou, check it out." Could be a campfire got out of control, or it could be a diversion. Either way, we need to make sure it doesn't spread this way. As the two men hurried toward the smoke, weapons drawn, Amelia's pulse quickened. A diversion. It had to be Colton. He had come for her, just as she had known he would. But where was he? And how could he possibly overcome the 3 remaining gang members on his own? Her answer came moments later in the form of a gunshot from the western edge of the clearing opposite the fire. Dixon and Jasper dropped instinctively, drawing their weapons, while Shorty yelped in pain, clutching his shoulder where blood was already staining his shirt. "Grey," Dixon bellowed, firing blindly toward the trees. "Show yourself, you coward." Another shot rang out, this one splintering the log where Dixon had been sitting seconds before. "Jasper," Dixon ordered. "Get behind the girl. Use her as a shield." Jasper scrambled toward Amelia, his gun drawn. Amelia pressed back against the tree, a silent prayer on her lips as death approached in the form of Jasper Blackwell's leering face. But before he could reach her, a third shot cracked through the air. Jasper stumbled, a look of surprise crossing his features as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He took one more faltering step toward Amelia before collapsing face first into the dirt. "Blackwell!" Dixon shouted, his composure cracking for the first time as he realized his right-hand man was down. "Drop your weapon, Dixon," Colton's voice called from somewhere to Amelia's left. "It's over." "Not while I still have a hostage," Dixon snarled, changing tactics. He lunged toward Amelia, clearly intending to use the same strategy he had ordered Jasper to employ. Time seemed to slow as Dixon charged toward her, his scarred face twisted with fury and desperation. Amelia saw the glint of his knife, heard the thunder of another gunshot, watched as Dixon's momentum carried him forward even as the bullet struck him in the side. He crashed into her, his weight bearing them both to the ground. Amelia felt a sharp pain as the back of her head struck a rock, and then Dixon's weight was crushing her, his blood soaking into her dress. "Amelia," Colton's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Amelia, hold on." Hands pulled Dixon's body off her, and then Colton's face swam into view, his green eyes wide with concern. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his fingers already working to untie the ropes binding her to the tree. "Did he stab you?" Amelia tried to speak, but her head was spinning from the impact with the rock. I don't think so," she managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Colton's hands moved quickly over her, checking for wounds, sighing in relief when he found none apart from the lump forming on the back of her head. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gentler now that he had determined she wasn't seriously injured. Amelia nodded, immediately regretting the movement as pain lanced through her skull. Colton noticed her wince and without further discussion, scooped her into his arms. "The others," she murmured, glancing around the clearing where Jasper lay motionless and Dixon was groaning, clutching his bleeding side. "Shorty's wounded but alive," Colton informed her as he carried her toward the shade of a large cottonwood. "Big Mike and Lou should be dealing with my little campfire right about now, but they'll be back soon. We need to move quickly." As if on cue, shouts came from the direction of the smoke, which was already beginning to thin. "They're coming back," Amelia warned, struggling to sit up. "Easy," Colton cautioned, setting her down carefully and drawing his revolver. "Stay here. This will be over soon." True to his word, the confrontation ended quickly. Big Mike and Lou, returning to find their leader wounded, and Jasper apparently dead, chose surrender over a shootout when faced with Colton's steady aim, and the distant sound of approaching horses, the posse from Nebraska City, finally arriving. Within the hour, the 3 surviving members of the Dixon gang were securely bound. Dixon's wound had been roughly bandaged to keep him alive for the hangman, and Amelia was seated on Colton's horse, his coat draped around her shoulders to ward off shock. "You came for me," she said softly as he checked the bindings on Lou's wrists one final time. Even knowing it was a trap, Colton straightened, his eyes meeting hers. "I would have come for you even if it meant facing the entire Confederate army," he replied with such simple sincerity that Amelia's breath caught. Before she could respond, the posse arrived in a thunder of hooves 10 men from Nebraska City, led by Sheriff Tate, remaining deputy. Explanations were made, prisoners were transferred to the posse's custody, and preparations began for the return journey to town. Throughout it all, Colton remained close to Amelia, his hand occasionally touching her arm or shoulder as if reassuring himself that she was truly safe. And when it came time to ride back, he insisted on having her on his horse, his arms around her as he held the reins. "I should be angry with you," Amelia murmured as they rode side by side with the posse, the gang members following under heavy guard. "For what?" Colton asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "For saying I was spoken for yesterday," she replied, a hint of mischief entering her tone despite her exhaustion and the throbbing in her head. "It seems to have caused quite a lot of trouble." Colton's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "I'm sorry for that," he said, his breath warm against her ear, "though I can't bring myself to regret it entirely." "Oh." Amelia turned her head slightly to see his face. "And why is that?" There was a moment of hesitation before Colton answered, his voice low and intimate. "Because it gave me a chance to know you, Amelia Dawson. And in knowing you, even for so brief a time, I've found something I didn't know I was missing." Amelia's heart thundered in her chest, hope blossoming despite all logic and propriety. "And what might that be, Deputy Grey?" "A home," he answered simply. "Not a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging that I've never felt before, not in all my years of wandering." The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "That's quite a declaration from a man who's known me less than 2 days," she said, trying to keep her tone light despite the emotion welling within her. 2 days or 2 decades, Colton replied. "Some things you just know." He paused as if gathering courage. "I love you, Amelia Dawson." "I can't explain it any better than that. And I understand if you think me forward or foolish, neither," Amelia interrupted, her voice soft but certain. "Neither forward nor foolish, just unexpected." She leaned back slightly, allowing herself to rest against his solid chest. "But then, I'm finding that the most unexpected things can also be the most precious." It wasn't a declaration of love in return, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of possibility, of a door left open that might, in time, lead to something profound and lasting. And for now, as they rode together beneath the vast Nebraska sky, that was enough. By the time they reached Nebraska City, word of the Dixon gang's capture had preceded them. The townsfolk lined the main street, cheering as the posse rode through with their prisoners. Martha Dawson pushed her way to the front of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she spotted her niece riding safely with Colton. "Amelia! Oh, thank God!" she cried as Colton reined in his horse and carefully helped Amelia dismount. Martha enveloped her in a fierce embrace, then pulled back to examine her with anxious eyes. "You're hurt," she observed, noting the dried blood in Amelia's hair. "Just a bump on the head," Amelia assured her. "Thanks to Deputy Grey." Martha turned to Colton, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully to one side. "You brought her back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just as you promised." "Yes, madam," Colton replied with a slight nod. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked between her niece and the deputy, some intuition apparently informing her of the shift in their relationship. "Well," she said after a moment, "I expect you'll be wanting a proper meal and a chance to clean up, Deputy Grey. Our door is always open to you." It was as close to a blessing as circumstances would allow for the moment, and Colton accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. I'd be honored." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Dixon, Shorty, Big Mike, and Lou were transported to Fort Kearny to await trial, while Jasper Blackwell was buried in an unmarked grave on the outskirts of town. Deputy Wilson, miraculously, survived his wound and was expected to make a full recovery, much to everyone's relief. Amelia, despite Martha's protests, insisted on returning to her normal routine after just 1 day of rest. The boarding house needed running, bread needed baking, and life, she maintained firmly, needed living. And through it all, Colton Grey remained in Nebraska City. He took a room at the hotel, rather than the boarding house propriety demanded as much, but he spent every available moment with Amelia. They walked together along the town's quiet streets, shared meals with Martha and the boarders, and in the evenings sat on the boarding house porch swing, talking until the stars emerged in the vast prairie sky. It was on one such evening, exactly 1 week after the confrontation with the Dixon gang, that Colton finally broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "I've been offered a position," he began, his voice carefully neutral. Amelia's heart sank. This was it, then the farewell she had been dreading. Despite his declaration of love, he was a lawman first and foremost. His duty would always call him elsewhere, to chase down the next outlaw, to bring justice to the next frontier town. "I see," she replied, striving to keep disappointment from her tone. "Where will you be going?" "Nowhere," Colton answered, a hint of something amusement, hope in his voice. "Sheriff Tate has asked me to become his permanent deputy here in Nebraska City." Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Here? But your work as a marshal was always meant to be temporary," Colton finished for her. "I took the position after the war because I had nothing else, nowhere to call home. But now—" He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Now I have a reason to stay in one place." Hope, wild and wonderful, bloomed in Amelia's chest. "You're staying in Nebraska City." "Truly, if you'll have me," Colton confirmed, his green eyes serious in the gathering dusk. "Not just in the town, Amelia, in your life." He took a deep breath, then slid from the swing to one knee before her. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast by most standards, but these past days have only confirmed what I knew the moment I saw you. I love you, Amelia Dawson. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Amelia's breath caught, tears welling in her eyes. A week ago, such a proposal would have seemed absurd. She'd barely known him, after all. But the events of that week had revealed Colton's character more clearly than years of ordinary courtship might have done. His courage, his integrity, his tenderness, all had been displayed not in words but in actions. And her own heart, which she had kept carefully guarded since her parents' passing, had opened to him with a swiftness and completeness that both frightened and exhilarated her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as certainty filled her. "Yes, Colton Grey, I will marry you." His face lit with such joy that Amelia's heart seemed to expand in her chest, making room for this new, unexpected love. He rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I have nothing to offer but myself," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "No fortune, no fancy house. Just my heart and my hands and whatever life we build together." "It's more than enough," Amelia assured him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "It's everything I could want." The porch door opened, spilling lamplight around them as Martha appeared in the doorway. "It's getting chilly out here," she announced, though the September evening was mild. "Perhaps you'd like to come in for some coffee before Deputy Grey returns to the hotel." Colton and Amelia exchanged a glance, both suppressing smiles at Martha's transparent attempt to chaperone. "Actually, Aunt Martha," Amelia said, taking Colton's hand in hers, "we have something to tell you." Martha's eyebrows rose, though there was more anticipation than surprise in her expression. "Do you now?" "Yes, madam," Colton confirmed, straightening to his full height. "I've asked your niece to marry me, and she's done me the great honor of accepting." For a moment, Martha simply stared at them. Then, to both their surprise, she burst into tears, not the distressed sobs of the previous week, but tears of evident joy. "Oh, my dears," she exclaimed, pulling first Amelia, then Colton into fierce embraces. "Nothing could make me happier, nothing at all." Later, after Martha had exhausted her initial excitement and retired to bed, Amelia and Colton stood together at the front gate of the boarding house, reluctant to part for the night. "I should go," Colton said, though he made no move to leave. "You should," Amelia agreed, equally motionless. He smiled, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "Tomorrow," he promised. "We'll start planning tomorrow." "A new beginning," Amelia murmured. "The first of many," Colton replied, his eyes reflecting the starlight as he gazed at her with such tenderness that Amelia felt her breath catch. And when he finally kissed her, a gentle, reverent meeting of lips that spoke of promises kept, and a future shared, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, just as the leaves were beginning to turn gold and crimson. The entire town of Nebraska City seemed to attend, packing the small Methodist church to capacity and spilling out onto the steps. Sheriff Tate, his leg healing nicely, gave Amelia away in the absence of her father, and Martha, resplendent in a new lavender dress ordered specially from Omaha, wept happy tears throughout the ceremony. Colton, standing at the altar in a new black suit, felt his heart nearly stop when Amelia appeared at the back of the church. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and her auburn hair was adorned with tiny white flowers. But it was her smile, radiant and filled with promise, that took his breath away. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Johnson, "we are gathered here today." The words of the ceremony washed over them, familiar and eternal, as Colton and Amelia pledged their lives to one another before God and their community. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the cheer that erupted from the congregation seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. The celebration continued at the boarding house, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by what seemed like every household in town. There was dancing in the yard to fiddle music provided by the Simmons brothers, speeches from well-wishers, and enough cake to feed twice their number of guests. As the afternoon waned into evening, Colton found a moment to draw his new wife aside, into the quiet sanctuary of the garden where they could speak privately. "Mrs. Grey," he said, savoring the sound of her new name, "are you happy?" Amelia leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. "Deliriously so," she assured him. "And you, Deputy Grey, beyond words," he murmured into her hair, "though I still can't quite believe my good fortune. A month ago I was a solitary man with nothing but a badge and a gun to my name. Now I have a wife, a home, a community. A future," Amelia added softly. "Yes," Colton agreed, tightening his arms around her. "A future I never dared imagine." As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a golden glow over the continuing festivities. Martha found the newlyweds in the garden and approached with a mysterious smile. "I have something for you," she announced, handing Colton a folded document. "Consider it my wedding gift." Colton opened the paper, reading it by the light of a nearby lantern, his expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment. "Mrs. Dawson, I can't accept this," he protested, though his voice was thick with emotion. "You most certainly can, and you will," Martha replied firmly. "I'm not getting any younger, and that plot of land has been sitting empty since my Henry passed. It's just outside town, close enough for Amelia to help with the boarding house when needed, but far enough for your privacy. There's a small cabin already built and plenty of room to expand as your family grows." Amelia, reading the deed over Colton's shoulder, looked at her aunt with tears shimmering in her eyes. "Aunt Martha, this is too generous." "Nonsense," Martha dismissed with a wave of her hand. "What else would I do with it? Besides, someone needs to put that land to good use, and I can think of no one better than you two." Her expression softened. "You deserve this happiness, my dears, both of you." Before either could respond, Sheriff Tate appeared at the garden gate, looking apologetic. "Hate to interrupt, but there's a situation at the saloon that needs attending to, Deputy." Colton hesitated, torn between his new duties and his bride. "Go," Amelia urged, gently pushing him toward the sheriff. "I'll be here when you return." With a grateful smile and a promise to be back as soon as possible, Colton departed with Sheriff Tate, leaving Amelia and Martha alone in the garden. "Are you truly happy, my dear?" Martha asked once the men were out of earshot. "It all happened so quickly." Amelia considered the question, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the simple gold band on her finger. "I am," she replied with quiet conviction. "I know it seems sudden to others, but when I'm with him, it feels like the most natural thing in the world. As if all my life has been leading to this moment, this man." Martha nodded in understanding. "Some souls recognize each other instantly," she mused. "Henry and I were like that. One meeting was all it took for us to know." The two women stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the party continued in the yard beyond the garden gate. "Well," Martha said finally, "I suppose we should rejoin your guests. It wouldn't do for the bride to disappear from her own wedding celebration." As they walked back to the festivities, Amelia found herself filled with a sense of contentment that went beyond mere happiness. It was a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by people she loved, embarking on a life with the man who had captured her heart in the most unexpected of ways. The months that followed were ones of adjustment and joy for the newlyweds. True to Martha's word, the cabin on the edge of town provided a perfect starter home, and Colton proved surprisingly adept at improvements and additions. By the time the first snows of winter blanketed Nebraska City, he had added a proper stone fireplace, expanded the kitchen, and begun construction on a barn. Amelia divided her time between helping Martha at the boarding house and making their cabin into a home. She planted a small winter garden, sewed curtains for the windows, and filled the shelves with books acquired from the town's modest lending library. Colton took to his role as deputy with natural ease. His reputation as the man who had brought down the Dixon gang lent him an authority that served him well in maintaining order, though he rarely had to resort to force. Most disputes in Nebraska City were settled with firm words and a steady presence. It was a good life, simple but fulfilling, and both Colton and Amelia found themselves happier than they had ever imagined possible. As Christmas approached, the cabin was transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles in every window. On Christmas Eve, they hosted their first dinner party with Martha, Sheriff Tate, and Reverend Johnson as their guests. "A toast," Sheriff Tate proposed, raising his glass as they sat around the table laden with roast goose and all the trimmings. "To Deputy and Mrs. Grey, who have brought such joy to our community." "And to absent friends," added Reverend Johnson solemnly, acknowledging those who could not be with them: Amelia's parents, Colton's comrades from the war, and all those who had gone before. "And to new beginnings," Martha concluded with a meaningful glance at Amelia, who blushed slightly but said nothing. Later, after their guests had departed and the dishes were washed and put away, Colton and Amelia sat before the fire, watching the flames dance as snow fell softly outside. "You've been quiet this evening," Colton observed, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him on the small sofa they had purchased from a family moving back east. "Is everything all right?" Amelia nodded, a mysterious smile playing about her lips. "Everything is perfect. In fact." She took his hand in hers, guiding it to rest on her still flat stomach. "I have a Christmas gift for you that couldn't be wrapped." Colton's expression shifted from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor Miller confirmed it yesterday," Amelia replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're going to have a baby, Colton, in early summer." For a moment, Colton simply stared at her, emotion rendering him speechless. Then he gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength, pressing his lips to her forehead, her cheeks, and finally her mouth in a kiss that conveyed what words could not. "A baby," he murmured when they finally parted. "Our child." His hand remained on her stomach, as if he might feel the tiny life already stirring beneath his palm. "I never thought. That is, I hoped someday, but so soon." "Are you happy?" Amelia asked, though his joy was evident in every line of his face. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Colton assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "Grateful, humbled, terrified." He laughed softly at the last admission. "I know nothing about being a father." "And I know very little about being a mother," Amelia replied with a smile. "But we'll learn together." They stayed by the fire late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams for their expanding family. And when they finally retired to their bedroom, the love they shared was all the more precious for the new life it had created. Spring arrived in Nebraska City, with its usual capriciousness, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, brilliant sunshine giving way to drenching rains. But by May, the weather had settled into a pattern of consistent warmth, and Amelia, now visibly pregnant, spent much of her time in the garden that bloomed with new life. It was there that Colton found her one evening in early June, kneeling among the rows of vegetables despite her increasing difficulty in such positions. The sight of her auburn hair escaping its pins, cheeks flushed with exertion, one hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach, filled him with such overwhelming love that for a moment he simply stood and watched her, committing the image to memory. "You're staring, Deputy Grey," Amelia called without looking up, a smile in her voice. "Guilty as charged, Mrs. Grey," Colton replied, moving to help her to her feet. "But can you blame a man for admiring his beautiful wife?" Amelia laughed, accepting his assistance with a grateful sigh. "I feel about as beautiful as a milk cow these days." "Then you're the most enchanting milk cow in the territory," Colton assured her, earning a playful swat on his arm. Flatterer. But she was smiling as she brushed dirt from her apron. "You're home earlier than expected." "No trouble in town today." "None worth mentioning," Colton confirmed, taking her hand as they walked toward the cabin. "Though I did receive some interesting news. The territorial governor is establishing a new marshal's office in Omaha, and they're looking for experienced men to staff it." Amelia's steps faltered slightly. "Oh, Sheriff Tate put my name forward," Colton continued, watching her face carefully. "It would mean a promotion, more pay, a chance to make a real difference across the territory." "I see." Amelia's voice was carefully neutral. "And is this something you want?" They had reached the porch now, and Colton guided her to the swing that had been his first addition to the cabin, a recreation of the one where he had proposed at the boarding house. "What I want," he said slowly, once they were seated side by side, "is to be wherever you and our child are. Nebraska City has become home in a way no place has ever been for me before." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But I'd be lying if I said part of me wasn't tempted by the challenge." Amelia was quiet for a long moment, her free hand resting on her stomach where their child occasionally made its presence known with vigorous kicks. "Omaha isn't so very far," she said finally, her voice thoughtful. "And it's a growing city, with schools and opportunities that Nebraska City can't offer." Colton's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You'd consider moving?" "I'd consider anything that made you happy," Amelia replied simply. "Just as I know you'd do the same for me." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Besides, Martha has been hinting that she might sell the boarding house. The work is becoming too much for her, and she's received an offer from a couple from Council Bluffs." "She'd come with us," Colton realized aloud. "To Omaha," Amelia nodded. "She's mentioned wanting to be close to her great niece or nephew. And truthfully, I'd welcome her help with the baby, especially if you're to have more demanding duties." "You're remarkable, do you know that?" Colton said, shaking his head in wonder. "Most women would balk at leaving a home they've just established. Most women haven't had their lives turned upside down by a handsome deputy marshal who saved them from bandits," Amelia countered with a teasing smile. "I've learned to be adaptable." Colton laughed, pulling her closer to his side. "We don't have to decide tonight. The position won't be filled until autumn after the baby comes. We'll have time to consider all our options." "Indeed," Amelia agreed. "And speaking of the baby, we still haven't settled on names." "I was thinking perhaps William for a boy after my father." "William Grey," Colton tested the name. "It has a fine, strong sound to it. And for a girl, I thought perhaps Elizabeth after your mother," Amelia suggested softly. Emotion tightened Colton's throat at this thoughtful gesture. His mother, Elizabeth Grey, had died when he was just 12, leaving him with only fading memories of her gentle voice and kind hands. "Elizabeth," he repeated, his voice husky. "It's perfect." As twilight descended, they remained on the porch swing, discussing names and plans and dreams for the future. And when the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Colton found himself offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken on that fateful day at the Nebraska Territorial Fair. William Thomas Grey was born on a sweltering July afternoon, entering the world with a lusty cry that his father swore could be heard all the way to the sheriff's office. He was a healthy, robust baby with a shock of dark hair like Colton's and eyes that promised to be the same deep blue as Amelia's. "He's perfect," Colton whispered, cradling his son with a mixture of awe and terror while Amelia watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant after the long labor. "He looks like you," she observed with a tired smile. "Poor child." Colton laughed, carefully returning the baby to her arms. "If he has your spirit and your heart, he'll be the luckiest boy in the territory, regardless of whose face he wears." Martha bustled in with fresh linens, shooing Colton away so that Amelia could rest. But even as he retreated to the kitchen where several of the townsfolk had gathered to await news of the birth, Colton found his thoughts remained with his wife and newborn son. A family. His family. The words echoed in his mind, filling him with a sense of purpose and belonging that he had never known before, not during his years as a soldier, nor in his time as a lawman. This, he realized, was what he had been seeking all along, though he hadn't recognized it until Amelia came into his life. In the weeks that followed William's birth, Colton found himself reevaluating his priorities. The marshal's position in Omaha still beckoned, offering advancement and challenges that appealed to the part of him that had always sought justice and order. But watching Amelia with their son, seeing the life they were building in their small corner of Nebraska City, he found himself increasingly reluctant to uproot them. The decision, when it came, arrived with unexpected clarity one September morning as he rode his rounds through town. Passing the newly constructed schoolhouse, he saw children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. In just a few short years, William would be among them. He would learn and grow in this community that had welcomed the Greys so warmly, surrounded by people who knew and cared for him. By the time Colton returned home that evening to find Amelia singing softly to William in the rocking chair by the fire, his mind was made up. "I'm declining the Omaha position," he announced without preamble as he hung his hat by the door. Amelia looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Are you certain? You seemed so interested when the offer first came." "I was," Colton acknowledged, moving to kneel beside the rocking chair. He reached out to stroke William's downy head, his heart swelling as the baby instinctively turned toward his touch. "But I've realized something important." "And what's that?" Amelia asked, her voice gentle. "That ambition is a poor substitute for happiness," Colton replied simply. "And my happiness is right here, with you and William. Nebraska City may not be the biggest town or offer the most prestigious position, but it's where we belong." Amelia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she leaned forward to press her forehead against his. "I would have followed you anywhere," she whispered. "I know," Colton assured her, cupping her cheek in his palm. "That's why I couldn't ask it of you, not when we have everything we need right here." Their lips met in a tender kiss, full of promise and shared understanding, until William squirmed between them with a plaintive cry that reminded his parents of his more immediate needs. Later that night, with William sleeping peacefully in the cradle Colton had crafted during the long winter months, the two sat before the fire, hands entwined, content in their decision and their shared life. "So, Deputy Grey," Amelia said with a teasing lilt to her voice, "does this mean you're planning to stay in Nebraska City indefinitely?" Colton pretended to consider the question, though his eyes danced with mirth. "Well, Mrs. Grey, I hear the sheriff might retire in a few years. Perhaps I'll set my sights on his position instead." "Sheriff Grey," Amelia tested the title, "it does have a certain ring to it." "It does indeed," Colton agreed. "And in the meantime, I was thinking we might want to add another room to the cabin." His expression grew more serious. "William might like a brother or sister someday." "Someday," Amelia agreed, her smile promising that someday might not be so very far off. As the fire crackled, and the autumn wind whispered around the eaves of their small but growing home, Colton Grey reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led him to this moment. A chance encounter at a fair, a bandit's unwelcome advances, a declaration made in haste but proven true by time, all had combined to bring him the greatest happiness he had ever known. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Colton smiled, drawing her closer to his side. "I was just remembering the day we met, how I told Blackwell you were spoken for, and I said no," Amelia recalled with a soft laugh. "You certainly did," Colton agreed. "Fiercest woman I'd ever seen standing up to an outlaw like that." "And yet here we are," Amelia mused, her head resting against his shoulder. "Perhaps I should have said yes after all. To Blackwell." Colton's tone was incredulous. Amelia's laugh brightened the room. "No, you ridiculous man, to being spoken for by you." Colton's arms tightened around her, his heart full to bursting with love for this remarkable woman who had become his wife, the mother of his child, the center of his world. "You're definitely spoken for now, Mrs. Grey," he murmured against her hair. "And I intend to keep reminding you of that fact for the rest of our days." "I'm counting on it, Deputy," Amelia replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "I'm counting on it." And as their lips met, sealing once again the promise they had made to each other, both knew with absolute certainty that what had begun with a chance encounter at a fair had blossomed into something rare and precious, a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together in the growing frontier town they now called home.